This show has been calling out the incompetence and failed leadership of Pima County Sheriff Christopher Nanos in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
Trust me, it means a lot.
How shocking this is.
Movement, something knocked over. I don't care. If you're alive, you're going to fight.
I saw less of her recently.
The family gets there and they're walking through this saying, that's not right.
They thought, Annie thought that there had been a medical emergency because the home was not ransacked in any way.
Nancy Guthrie's home exit was already open, so why didn't she use it? When Annie stepped inside, the house looked spotless, almost untouched. Investigators say a scene like that can signal something planned, not a sudden disappearance. Family members quickly made it clear, this isn't a case of someone wandering off. Nancy's severe back pain limited her movement to short distances. With the door
Sheriff's deputy is now behind bars. The charges against him include kidnapping.
They were direct. And a back door left wide open. Was this planned from the start? Investigators confirmed troubling details at the scene. The home was described as immaculate, yet there were clear signs something had gone wrong. Surveillance footage shows a man approaching the front porch, noticing a door camera, and attempting to tamper with it before covering it up. Reports suggest the back door had been propped open, raising questions about whether it was meant to be an exit point. Despite these clues, the suspect managed to avoid capture for weeks, leaving neighbors shocked and searching for answers. A restless dog in the middle of the night. Could it have disrupted a hidden plan? Neighbors reported something highly unusual that night. A typically calm dog suddenly woke its owners, behavior they say had only happened once before. That rare moment later caught investigators' attention during a review of security footage. The community remains shaken, with many struggling to understand what may have unfolded. There were also reports that nearby cameras went offline around the same time,
who
raising
promised to
questions
serve
about
and
whether it was a
protect
coincidence
worked here.
or something more concerning. A barking dog? Did it force a sudden change in the plan? Investigators are now examining whether the open back door was meant to be the original escape route. Some reports suggest it may have been left open ahead of time, possibly near flower pots, pointing to a plan that didn't go as expected. Attention also shifted to unusual dog activity that night. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a random disturbance.
Arrested for kidnapping by mistake when you're wearing a badge. It's especially jarring.
Questions have also surfaced online, but sources confirmed the behavior wasn't linked to the case until investigators asked for footage. Despite the noise, the local community continues to focus on supporting the family and helping move the investigation forward. 1:40 a.m. A sudden wake-up call, a camera going offline, and a dog fixated on one direction. Was this all connected? According to gathered reports, the neighbor's dog, Jolene, woke her owner at around 1:40 a.m., an unusual time for any activity. Instead of barking, she persistently signaled by licking his face, clearly trying to get attention and be taken outside. Once outside, Jolene appeared focused, staring toward Nancy Guthrie's home. At the time, it didn't seem significant, but later reviews raised questions, especially since, around 1:47 a.m., the front door camera reportedly disconnected. Tightening the timeline, investigators are now examining closely. What seemed like a normal late-night interruption may now offer a critical clue into when key events were unfolding. A pattern that appeared once, then vanished, until that exact night returned with questions. According to gathered information, the dog's behavior around 1:40 a.m. was highly unusual and had only been seen one other time back on January 11th. Since then, there had been no repeat, making this moment stand out sharply in the timeline investigators are reviewing. Neighbors say this wasn't typical at all, especially for older, well-trained dogs. That detail has added weight to the idea that something out of the ordinary may have been happening nearby at the time. The community response has been strong and emotional. People came together, leaving flowers and ribbons outside Nancy Guthrie's home as a sign of support. Many described feeling deeply moved after hearing from the family, with a shared hope for answers and some sense of peace. While the neighborhood has since grown quieter, some visitors still stop by the home. Residents say it's a place where people pause, reflect, and try to process what happened, even as the investigation continues behind the scenes. Limited police activity, a familiar neighbor, and a dog that may have sensed more than anyone realized. According to reports, visible law enforcement presence around Nancy Guthrie's home has been minimal, aside from added security and occasional media coverage. Observations from nearby residents suggest the area appears calm, though that may not reflect the full scope of the investigation. The neighbor and his dog had seen Nancy before during regular walks, especially in earlier years. While sightings became less frequent over time, it's believed the dog could still recognize her, possibly even by scent. There were also unconfirmed reports that her own dog may have passed away shortly before the incident. As attention around the case grew, so did public reactions. Despite some criticism online, sources say the decision to speak out was encouraged to keep awareness high, highlight the case, and potentially bring forward new information that could help move the investigation ahead. A possible plan disrupted, and now investigators are piecing together what really happened that night. Sources indicate growing focus on how events unfolded, including the possibility that a neighbor's dog may have interrupted an intended plan. That detail continues to draw attention as the case moves into another critical phase. Authorities are also examining what are believed to be 2 ransom notes, working to verify their authenticity. At the same time, reports describe the home as immaculate when first discovered, despite signs suggesting Nancy Guthrie had been taken unexpectedly from her bedroom. These details, when combined, are shaping a clearer timeline, one that investigators hope will lead to answers and real progress in the case. She couldn't even walk far, yet she vanished from a spotless home. How does that happen? From the earliest moments, family members made it clear this isn't a case of someone wandering off. Nancy Guthrie was dealing with severe back pain, limiting her movement to short distances on her best days. That alone raised immediate concern. Then came the alarming details. Doors left open, blood found on the front doorstep, and a door camera reportedly torn down. Despite all of this, the inside of the home appeared untouched, described by multiple sources as immaculate, which only deepened the mystery. Early impressions even led some to briefly consider a medical emergency, simply because the scene didn't match what many would expect. But as more details surfaced, it became clear something was seriously wrong, and this case was far from ordinary. No signs of struggle, but she couldn't hear or move easily. So what really happened inside that home? Investigators noted something unusual right away. Even in a medical emergency, you would expect signs, items out of place, something disturbed. But the home remained immaculate, with no clear indication of movement or resistance. Nancy Guthrie, at 84, faced serious physical limitations. Reports suggest she relied on hearing aids and had difficulty moving, raising questions about how much awareness she had if something happened in the early morning hours. Experts point out that in such a condition, any sudden incident would likely leave some trace behind. Yet the absence of disruption inside the home only deepens the mystery, suggesting whatever occurred may have happened quickly and quietly. No signs of anything out of place, but moving someone like that without a trace raises serious questions. Experts explain that even without a direct struggle, guiding or carrying someone with limited mobility would likely disturb the environment. Small details, a shifted object, something knocked over, are usually expected in situations like this. Given Nancy Guthrie's condition, reports suggest she wouldn't have been able to move easily or respond quickly. That doesn't point to resistance, but it does make the lack of disruption inside the home stand out even more to investigators. At the same time, some note that a perfectly kept home wasn't unusual for her. Even so, the idea that someone could enter, remove her, and leave without leaving clear signs continues to puzzle those reviewing the case. An immaculate home, but logic says something should have been out of place. So why wasn't it? Experts point out that even in unexpected situations, some level of disruption is usually seen. Not necessarily a full struggle, but at least movement. Something shifted, something knocked over, especially when someone is suddenly taken off guard. At the same time, Nancy Guthrie's condition plays a key role. Reports suggest she had very limited mobility, meaning she likely couldn't resist in a typical way. That may explain the absence of a clear struggle, but not the complete lack of disturbance. Investigators continue to focus on this gap, because even without resistance, removing someone from a home often leaves subtle signs, like the already noted blood on the doorstep and the open back door, details that now carry even more weight in understanding what happened. Small details, the kind only family would notice. Could they be the key to what really happened? Investigators say it's often not obvious damage, but subtle changes that matter most. Something slightly out of place, something that doesn't feel right, details that stand out more to family members familiar with the home. At this stage, sources indicate there are no signs pointing to a typical break-in or theft. The focus remains on the idea that Nancy Guthrie was specifically targeted, not part of a random incident. Still, questions remain about early reports. Some mentioned minor disturbances, while others described the home as completely immaculate. That contrast has
Probably it
added
wasn't
another
his own
layer of
department
mystery,
that caught
leaving
him. It was the
investigators
Tucson
working to
Police
determine
Department.
which details
An
truly
outside
reflect
agency
what
had to
happened
step
inside.
in. That's a
An
massive
84-year-old
detail
woman
that
removed
shouldn't
from
be
her home,
overlooked.
Yet everything stayed in place. How is that even possible? Sources say law enforcement quickly recognized something was wrong, calling in major investigators early on. While the home was described as immaculate, that likely meant furniture and surfaces appeared undisturbed at first glance. However, experts point out a key issue. Moving someone with limited mobility would usually require effort, possibly more than one person. In most cases,
there are four
that
reasons
kind
that
of
choice
movement
makes
leads to
complete
small
operational
disruptions,
sense.
especially in an
Each one
unfamiliar
tells you
layout. That's why certain details stand out even more. The open back door, for example, challenges the idea of a perfectly untouched scene. Even without visible damage, investigators believe subtle signs may still reveal what truly happened inside that home. An open back door, yet everything else untouched. Does that really add up? Some experts question how an 84-year-old woman could be taken from her home without disturbing anything. In most cases, unfamiliar surroundings and limited mobility would lead to at least minor disruptions during movement. Others argue it's possible to move someone carefully, especially with planning or awareness of the layout. That perspective suggests the scene may not need to be chaotic to indicate something serious happened. Still, the debate highlights a key issue. While the home appeared orderly, details like the open door continue to challenge that picture. Investigators are now weighing both possibilities as they work to understand how events unfolded that night. Two able-bodied men, an elderly woman, and a room. Left untouched, was it easier than it seems? Experts reviewing the layout say it may not take much disruption to move someone in a space like that. With clear walkways and minimal obstacles, it's possible for a planned removal to happen without knocking things over. Images from inside the home show a simple setup: bedside table, open floor space, and rugs in certain areas. While rugs could become important for forensic analysis, the overall layout may have allowed careful movement without obvious disturbance. With the back door already open, investigators are considering the possibility that this was organized and deliberate. In that scenario, the lack of visible disruption may not be as surprising as it first appeared. A 40-minute window and a door propped open with whatever was nearby, does that point to a flaw in the plan? Investigators are now re-examining the reported timeline, which suggests the suspects may have spent a significant amount of time inside the home. This has raised new questions about whether that timeline is fully accurate. There are also claims that the back door may have been held open using nearby objects, possibly even flower pots. If true, some experts believe that could indicate improvisation rather than careful preparation. That detail matters, because in more organized cases, suspects typically bring what they need. Using items found at the scene could suggest a shift in the plan while events were unfolding. Adding another layer of uncertainty, investigators are now working to understand. A door held open, a plan in motion, and then something suddenly changed. Experts explain that propping a door open, even with nearby items like flower pots, can make moving someone much easier, especially when time and control are critical. It avoids delays and keeps the exit clear. But here's where it gets interesting. Some investigators believe this doesn't show
to her
poor
survival,
planning, but rather
critical
a
enough
planned
that it became the
exit route
central
through the back. The open door and even an open gate suggest a clear path was set in advance. However, evidence found at the front of the home points to a possible shift. That has led to one key theory. Something may have disrupted the original plan, forcing a different and more urgent exit than intended. A planned exit through the back. then a sudden switch to the front. What forced that change? Investigators believe the original plan may have been simple. Enter, exit through the same route, and leave quickly. But something appears to have shifted, leading to a possible backup plan and an exit through the front door instead. Around the same time, the family shared a message of hope, saying it's never too late for anyone with information to come forward. That statement continues to reflect their focus on finding answers and resolution. Experts also weighed in on the immaculate scene. While a clean space can help preserve certain clues, reports suggest multiple people entered the home early on, which may have affected potential evidence on the floors and surrounding areas. A perfectly clean floor. Could it actually hide the most important clues? Experts explain that collecting detailed evidence like footwear impressions requires early control of the scene. Without that, movement from family and responders can make it harder to preserve those subtle traces. Even so, an immaculate home can still work in investigators' favor. Someone entering from outside may bring in dirt or debris, leaving marks behind. At the same time, experts also look for what's missing. Faint impressions not visible to the eye. That's where advanced techniques come in. Tools like electrostatic lifts can sometimes reveal hidden traces, helping investigators recover details that might otherwise go unnoticed in a clean, undisturbed space. Critical evidence, like flower pots and floor prints, were they properly secured from the start? Experts say once a case turns suspicious, everything at the scene becomes
Very
important.
agency searching
Standard
for Nancy
procedure
Guthrie
calls
just
for
had
limiting
one of its
access,
own deputies
preserving
locked up
entry
for
and exit
kidnapping.
points, and collecting any items that may hold forensic value. With tools like electrostatic lifts available, investigators would likely be aware of how to protect subtle evidence like footwear impressions. That makes early scene control a key factor in what can ultimately be recovered. Attention has also turned to objects like the reported flower pots. If they were used, experts agree they should have been collected and tested for possible traces, as even small items can play a major role in building the full picture. Missed evidence, or evidence still waiting to be tested? Could small details change everything? Experts stress that even basic procedure would call for collecting items like flower pots if they were involved. Failing to secure them early could be a serious oversight, though it's still possible they were gathered later. Forensic specialists say prints, or even DNA, can sometimes be recovered from surfaces like that. It's not guaranteed, but with the right methods, those materials can still provide valuable leads. There's also growing interest in how other evidence is being analyzed. Reports indicate efforts to closely examine key materials, including written messages, as investigators work to reconstruct what happened and identify those responsible. Ransom notes under the microscope. Are they real or part of a bigger setup? Experts explain that reverse engineering, a ransom note, involves deep analysis by behavioral specialists. They study the language, tone, wording, and even handwriting to understand who may have written it and whether it's genuine. This process also includes comparing the notes with known details from the case, working alongside investigators and the family. The goal is to narrow down the type of person behind them and identify patterns that stand out. Some reports suggest that out of multiple of messages, a small number may be considered credible. If true, that adds weight to the investigation, as those specific notes could offer real clues about the suspect and their intentions. Multiple clues analyzed together. Could they finally point to the truth behind Nancy Guthrie's disappearance? Authorities are now looking at the full picture, combining forensic findings, timeline details, and the FBI's analysis of ransom notes. Sources say some of those notes are being treated as potentially authentic, adding urgency and direction to the investigation. Officials continue to stress that even the smallest piece of information could matter. If you know or think you know anything about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, coming forward could make a real difference in moving this case closer to answers.